Welcome to Faith Imperfect with Jessica. This is episode 6 of season 1 of The Chosen. And again, I have my sister Janice to join me. How are you doing, Janice?
Hey, I'm doing good. I'm excited about this episode. I feel like there's lots to talk about.
Yeah, I'll just tell the listeners, today was just a gorgeous day. My sister went to a graduation of somebody who's very close to her. And I spent a lot of the day outside. But we were like, you know what? We're so excited. We want to get this recorded. So it's like 10:30 at night and we're recording our episode.
Yes, that is funny.
Okay, so this episode starts off with a sign that looks like it's in Hebrew or something. I'm not actually sure what language it is. But in the captions, it read pawnbroker. There's a man in a long line that's outside of a tent. And you see him waiting outside, and some lady was in there, and she comes out saying something about getting cheated or something along those lines. And the man enters the tent and he's trying to sell his tools. He tells the man that he's traveling to the Dead Sea. The broker's skeptical. He's like, "You're a stranger, and why would you want to part with these tools?" So he kind of was insinuating that they were stolen. And the guy's like, "They're not stolen if that's what you're trying to say." And so the broker makes an offer for the tools. And the man starts to try to reason with him. But as he's reaching to show the tools, his arm gets exposed and you can see he has sores and he has leprosy. The broker immediately jumps back and yells, "Leper, you are marked." And he hits him with a stick that pushes him away and knocks him onto the floor. The broker continues with, and I had to put the captions on because I was like, what did he say? It was so mean. It was, "You couldn't just die. You had to take us all to hell." And he tells him that he's forbidden within 4 cubits. The man with leprosy takes the money that was offered off the table, even though he didn't want to settle for that much, and tells him, "I didn't mean any harm," and leaves. So he needs this money to travel to the Dead Sea.
I was just going to say the cut on the arm. I didn't realize it until later, the whole leprosy thing. But I was like, wow, the pawnbroker was covering his mouth and his nose. Like he felt like that guy was dirty. He didn't want him to breathe his air. It was really kind of an intense scene, I thought.
I agree completely. When you were saying it, I was thinking intense. It was pretty intense. At first, I didn't realize it either the very first time I watched it. But when he's like, "Leper," and I was like, oh, that's what it was. Because they did such a quick glimpse of the arm that I really didn't catch it. But until he said leper, that's when I first remember, oh, it's leprosy. Because we don't hear about leprosy now, but any kind of skin condition back then, I think they referred to a lot of it as leprosy. And I didn't go through and compile the scenes all together, so it will be choppy just like it was in the episode for this one. The next scene is Matthew and Gaius. They're staring at a chest full of gold and miscellaneous types of money, and it's in the middle of the street in the market. It is from that catch that Simon caught. They cashed it in, and they're watching this chest, and they say something about, well, they have to wait till they get here to pick it up. And Gaius says that they're sitting ducks. The other soldiers show up, and they take the money, but they're standing there, and they're acting like Gaius is being ridiculous. One of them makes a comment, "Why are you so nervous? It's just a chest of a few months' worth of taxes." But I thought that Matthew said that it was like a year and a half of taxes or something.
Actually, I think Matthew said that it was 2 years and 7 months. Yeah, because the soldier that walks around with him, I remember him looking at Matthew and being in disbelief, like, wow, that's worth that much?
Yeah. Well, they knew it's a lot, but I don't think they really realized what was in it. But they were there to pick it up. I guess it was showing that it got paid.
Right. I felt like Matthew was really fidgety because Gaius even made a comment to him, try to act like a normal person in a normal situation. And he was just really fidgety. It was almost like a person with ADHD would have acted like, just kind of real fidgety.
Yeah. Well, in one of the other episodes, and it might have been episode 1, and you weren't part of episode 1 with me, I kind of saw some of the mannerisms too. My son has high functioning autism, and I felt like there was some things he was doing that reminded me of that. And I was like, no, it's just in my head. And when I watched the round table, Dallas, the director, said that they kind of did want to portray Matthew as being on the spectrum with high functioning autism. They call it Asperger's. So they kind of said that they thought that he would be a little bit on the OCD side and have that as well. And I was reluctant to talk about it a whole lot just because I know if there's people out there that are or have children that are, they could take offense. But actually, Dallas said that they've gotten a lot of positive feedback because Dallas actually says that he's on the spectrum. He's high functioning autistic, the director. And so he has Matthew in there, and I guess a lot of people have had positive reactions to that. So I wasn't going to bring it up a whole lot and talk about it, but they do say that at least for this series, they made him that way. I don't know if he really would have been. No one said that about him in the Bible, but they just know that he's very meticulous and obviously was good at math and good at note taking. But
Right,
yeah,
right.
so I think that's what you were picking up on. But no, I'm glad you mentioned about the fidgety. Yeah, because I was trying not to say word for word the whole episode. So I left some of that stuff out, but it was pertinent. He was very nervous, and it was kind of funny when he told him act natural. And he's like,
Right.
this is me acting
Yes.
natural. Yeah.
And maybe it was more of an OCD thing. I could kinda see that too.
Yeah, well, you see it definitely later. We'll talk about that in different
Yes.
scenes. Yeah, a little bit of both. And sometimes they go hand in hand and sometimes they don't. Okay, so the next scene we see is Nicodemus, and he's telling that Av Dean, who's like the second in command of the Sanhedrin, about his visit with John the Baptist. He tells everybody that John isn't a threat because they think that he's a threat. They never really said who put him in jail. It was alluded to in the last episode. So then he tells them that John is not a threat to Herod or to the public. And the Avbiat Dean says that John has a following. And Nicodemus says they're only standing in line to be immersed just to stand in line. Like pretty much they see a line and they're like, oh, there's people here. I'm going to go there too. And so he's trying to dumb it down of what's going on with John the Baptist. Nicodemus tells him that by them arresting him, they're just putting him more on a pedestal. The Avbiat Dean says that they didn't put in an order to arrest him. Nicodemus says that he was shown sworn statements from the soldiers that it was a Pharisee that had him arrested. Shmuel says it was him, so he fesses up. He says he didn't want the sin to go unpunished. He said he had him arrested because John had called them all a brood of vipers. And he starts going into, do you know how vipers are born? And the council goes on to tell Shmuel that now he's drawn more attention to the person and put their sect on Rome's radar. So the Avbiat Dean tells Shmuel that he needs to go to his teacher Nicodemus for approval on all matters of polity and practice. So that's where that scene ends. The only thing I was thinking of about this part of the scene was it did seem like Shmuel really has and you see it more and more throughout the episode. Like he seems very critical of John the Baptist, Jesus, everybody. Nicodemus is more like in awe and wonder and like questioning, and he's real curious.
Yeah.
And the other guy is just like rigid in his ways.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with that. I feel like that too, because I noticed, he was the one that kept saying the written laws, right? If you go by the written laws, this is what we should be doing. So he's a very to the books kind of guy that is just trying to do the right thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. In the next scene, you see the apostles and Mary, and they're breaking down a camp with tents and a campfire. Little James, which is the one that has the limp, tells Simon that he was about to join the temple choir before following Jesus. Simon thinks he's joking, and he's like, I forget what he says, but he's like, yeah, and I'll quit my job doing something for Caesar, or I don't remember what he said. So then James starts to sing. Everyone in the camp kind of stops what they're doing, and you could tell they're impressed, and they clap. And then Jesus shows up and he says he's going to be taking his mother back to Nazareth and that he'll catch up with everybody at their camp in Capernaum. So Jesus tells Simon to go ahead of the others so that he could take care of business at home. So Simon wants to stay and protect the others. Jesus says in time, but he's the only one there that has family. So then Simon is okay with going because he's like, okay, yeah, I guess I see your point. So the next scene, you see Gaius and Matthew, and they're in Quintus's office. Quintus is happy that due to the recent payment now, that huge sum of money that came in from Simon's catch, that now he's ahead of Pilate's projections on his budget. He says that Simon delivered when it mattered, and then he's like, I wonder if he can do it again. And he's kind of like, he's joking, but you could tell that the other two were concerned, like, uh-oh, are they gonna do something to Simon just to get him to come up with more money? Quintus is convinced that Matthew was tricked, though. The whole scene, because he recorded it in detail, he's like, "Oh, you were tricked," and that, his report, couldn't be accurate. Now that really, you could tell, bothered Matthew in this scene. He's like, "No, I was very thorough. I know what I saw." So Quintus, regardless, is still very happy with Matthew. Their meeting gets interrupted, though, with news that King Herod is on his way. So Quintus tells them to prepare his guard for inspection. You could tell that they're all kind of on alert now. Matthew and Gaius are just kind of waiting around to be relieved. Quintus mockingly says, "How long would you have stood there?" He's still happy with everything, and actually, in that moment, he does ask Gaius something about being Germanic or his background, and he promotes Gaius to rank of Primi. I didn't look up the ranks, but he says, "I'm promoting you." So he's very happy with how stuff's been turning out with Matthew, and due to that, Gaius gets promoted. Quintus then asks Matthew, "Let me give you a hypothetical situation." He says, "What if you have this childhood rival who was given everything and you were giving nothing, but rose to a higher rank? You want to make it clear that you won. It's your meeting, even if he arrived unannounced." So I did take that directly from the movie because I felt like it was pretty to the point. Matthew says that he would show his plans for infrastructure. Quintus dismisses them, and he's super happy with that input. He says to him, "Simple." And even Gaius looks surprised at Matthew's response. So then that insinuates then that King Herod must be a childhood rival of Quintus's, and he wants to show him up, even though this guy's showing up uninvited, because he wants to one up him.
I just wanted to make a comment about how funny I thought it was when the one soldier ran in to interrupt them. And then I guess Quintus was thinking that Matthew and the escort were leaving, but Matthew was just still kind of standing there. And then Quintus turns around and makes a comment about how, wow, I wonder how long you would have stood there. I just thought that that was kind of funny because, again, it goes back to like Matthew just always kind of being really fidgety and like not realizing, I guess, when he's overstayed his welcome. That's kind of what I felt like when I seen it.
Yeah. And it was funny. I laughed, but they were waiting for him to say, "You can leave." And I noticed that Gaius was still there too, though. It wasn't just Matthew.
Right. Yep.
So they both kind of were waiting. Yeah, so if they wouldn't have stood around, Gaius wouldn't have got promoted. I don't think any of that's in the Bible. I just did want to say that. None of these names, like Gaius's name isn't in there, although I have a theory about the idea of Gaius later in another episode, but Quintus isn't in there either. So these are characters that they developed for the show, but I'm sure there was characters like this that were around. The next scene is Jesus and his group of apostles plus Mary. They are walking through a field. They're on their way somewhere, and they encounter a woman who's picking flowers. Jesus recognizes her beads as something from Egypt, and he tells her that he grew up there. She tells him her name is Tamar and says where she's from. The apostles ask if Jesus lived in Bethlehem during the massacre of the innocents. Big James tells the others how back during that time, Herod had any child under the age of 2 killed. While they're discussing this, you see that man that we saw in the very beginning who went into the pawn shop with leprosy. He shows up and Mary screams. The apostles are all like saying, "Don't breathe his air." So that goes right back to your comment, Janice, of how that guy in the shop covered his mouth up. They're like, "Don't breathe his air and cover your mouth." And Jesus tells them not to worry. And he starts to approach the man. They're all telling him, "No, no, no." They're like trying to forewarn him like he doesn't know any better. And the apostles are trying to tell him to stop. But the man says, "Please." And then he drops to his knees in front of Jesus and says, "Don't turn away from me." Jesus says he won't. The man says, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Only if you want to. I submit to you. My sister was a servant at the wedding, and she told me what you can do. I know you can heal me if you are willing." So then Jesus comes down to his level. He's eye to eye with him, and he says, "I am willing." Jesus puts his hand on the man's shoulder and says, "Be cleansed." Slowly you start to see all the sores on him start to heal. He has some on his chest, on his hands, on his arms. His skin becomes clear. He's in kind of disbelief, and he hugs Jesus and he says, "Thank you." And he says, "I knew it." The man asks what he can do, but Jesus says, "Don't say anything to anyone." Jesus tells him to go to the priest and show so that they can inspect him and say that he's cleansed and to make the proper offering in the temple. Jesus asks the rest of the people, the other apostles, does anyone have an extra tunic for this man? And they all start offering him, by the way. And then Jesus, like, he only needs one. So the man puts it on and then he hugs Jesus and he's crying.
I wanted to just intersect for a second. I loved that scene where the apostles were all trying to take off all of their tunics
Yeah.
and, like, because obviously they were in shock at what they seen, so they were just, like, offering that, all of them,
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was pretty cool.
The whole scene was really awesome. This is in the Bible. I was going to actually read from Mark 1, verses 40 through 45, but I had one other sentence for that scene. That woman from Egypt was still there. So she saw all of that and she's like in awe. And then you see her kind of like half run off and leave. So it kind of leads into something later. But yeah, that whole scene, it's like when you read it in the Bible, yeah, it's impactful, but somebody acting it out, like, I feel like it was just so much more impactful. Seeing it, him crying, them hugging. I know I was in tears.
Yes, me too. It was an absolute it was just a really great scene. And like you said, I've never read the Bible, but I think even just I like other books that I've read in my life and then have watched a movie on it later. It's different reading it than actually seeing it reenacted. So I thought that that was really cool.
And I think that's why I like this show so much. I mean, even though there are scenes that aren't in the Bible, the ones that are, that's the thing, it's like, what I feel like when I've read it in the Bible, and I haven't always read it from the Bible, sometimes it was just in Sunday school, it could be impactful, but sometimes it's not, and you don't get that, like, the connection and the emotion sometimes, because seeing people act it out, it's just so much more relatable. I like that they're doing this because I think it's really eye-opening.
Absolutely. I agree.
So in Mark 1, I'll read this real quick. It's only the 5 verses. Mark 1, verse 40, the title of this chapter says, Jesus heals a man with leprosy. And you hear that throughout the Bible. He's healed many with leprosy. There's only a few where they actually talk about the story, though. So it says, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said. Be clean. Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. So a lot of that from that scene is directly out of the Bible.
Right. So I just wanted to ask, is what you're saying then that even though he told the gentleman that had leprosy to not say anything, he actually did go against it and started like spreading the word?
Yeah, and
Wha-
that's the thing. They talked about that in the round table too, and I think it might just be because you saw, I mean, okay, yes, with Matthew, they're spitting at him and stuff, but you saw how mean the man was. And I know that it's not written exactly like that, but I believe that people were that mean. They hated them. They thought they were. I believe that back in those days, if someone had blindness or if someone had leprosy or any kind of affliction, people attributed it to their sin. You must have done something bad to be born with that, or someone in your family. So they just saw these people as so sinful and so and unclean, and anything unclean was rejected. And so it was just really harsh. So I could imagine too being so overjoyed, word got out because that's going to spread, right? It's kind of like you tell a little secret to someone and you try to confide in them and then they go tell someone because they just can't believe their eyes. But it did say that he went and he told others about it. So the next scene is at Zebedee's house. He was the father of James and John. He is tending to a garden that's on the roof of his house. His wife, Salome, is sending things up to him on like a pulley system through the roof. He gets excited because he's on the roof and he sees his sons and Jesus coming down the street. So he yells to his wife, and Salome meets Jesus outside. And without stopping, she keeps eye contact with Jesus the whole time. She tells James and John, listen to him, please, and stay by his side. So I don't think she had met him yet, but she knew who he was. She invites Jesus in, and Jesus says, "Well, is it okay? It's not just us. There's going to be more." She's like, It's fine." So Zebedee stops his sons before they go in, and he's like, "Where's Simon?" And they're like, "He's taking care of business at home." He kind of jokingly says, "Oh, I thought he got cold feet and, and wasn't following Jesus." And that was where that scene ended.
It's probably safe to say that after that whole fishing scene or episode, with Zebedee and the two sons and Simon and Andrew, um, Zebedee apparently told his wife what had happened. And that's why she met Jesus out in the road and was like staring at him the whole time. Is that safe to say? That she probably heard like of the miracle through Zebedee?
Yeah, when you said that, it actually reminded me, and I don't think we talked about it, or maybe we did with that episode. Remember, there was a part where the sons are like, "Should we follow?" And they looked to their dad, and their dad was like, "Yeah, go. I'll let your mother know why you're not going to be there for supper."
Yes, yes,
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
right.
And he would wonder anyway, where are they? Because I'm sure they're gone for days at a time. So he probably had to say, "Hey, they're following the Messiah," you know?
Right. And the other thing I was going to say is I think it was John and James when they were talking to their father, Zebedee, outside, and he was thinking that Simon got cold feet, that John and James looked at him and said, "You should see Simon now. He's a changed man." I thought that was pretty cool.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't jot that down. And actually, now that you said that too, I remember him saying that not only that as well, but he's the teacher's pet. Didn't they say something like that?
Yes. Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So that
Yeah.
was all really good. See, it's like
Yeah.
I didn't want to write down word for word, but a lot of that stuff, it's just so good. It's like, watch the episodes. If you haven't watched the
Right.
episode, watch it.
Well, and I feel like certain things stand out for me because, like, I don't really take notes when I'm watching the episodes. Um, because I just feel like there's so like, memorable moments that I know I'm not going to forget to talk about. That was like one of them, knowing the history with Simon. And he didn't really have a whole lot of faith until good things started happening to him. So that part was memorable to me that they said, "Oh, you should see him. He's a changed man."
In the next scene, Simon is at home. You see his mother-in-law is on the bed. She looks like she's fevering. Simon is singing to her and patting her forehead with a cloth. She's very still, and he covers her up. And then he comes out of the room and he tells Eden that she's asleep. Andrew and Simon then walk outside and they find Matthew standing outside. And Simon tells him, "Stop following us." Matthew talks about what he saw with the man on the shore. Sounds like he wants to talk about the man on the shore. Simon tries to tell him that you saw nothing. He gets real defensive. He tells him, "Forget it. You saw nothing." And Andrew says, "Go home." Matthew says he doesn't believe what he saw, but he does. He needs to know if he was deceived. So that conversation with Quintus is getting to him like, "You were tricked. Like they took advantage of you. You were tricked." And so now he's like, "Was I deceived?" So Andrew says, "What good is our answer if you don't even listen to yourself?" So he saw it with his own eyes and he's still doubting it, what he saw. And so Andrew's pretty much saying, if you aren't going to believe yourself, you're not going to believe what we say. And then that scene ends.
And so I thought it was really kind of cute that when it showed the scene of Simon taking care of Eden's mom, because we know from another episode that he wasn't a very big fan of Eden's mom staying with them. Again, this was back when, his faith wasn't so great and he was just in a hurry to go fishing all the time and really didn't care about anything else. To see him singing to her was very passionate.
It was heartwarming. That's a really good point you made, that he was so caught up in his debt, in trying to make up the debt. And it was so like money, 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 money. And only because he was in debt, but still, it was controlling everything, that he wasn't showing the care and compassion to his loved ones. And now that that stress is gone, he's following Jesus. Yes, it was extra benefit that Jesus helped get him a means to pay the debt, but by following Jesus now, he could show that care and compassion for his loved ones.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I was just going to say that. It's almost like his face has totally been turned around. he looks at things in a whole new view now.
Realizing what's truly important. Even though I know he was
Yes,
doing that stuff for the people that he loves, he was trying to help Andrew pay his debt plus keep their house and boat and stuff, but it was taking over all aspects of his life. Yeah.
right.
Because even at that point, Eden had told him, "You haven't seen Ema," because, that was her Ema, her mom, "for over a month." And he was like, "Oh, it's been a month?" So yeah, we knew it. He was pretty much, like you said, not paying any mind to anything but what he had to get done.
Right, exactly.
So then we see the next scene is Nicodemus. He's about to give a speech. He's in some kind of a tent. They say they had set up a book for him and stuff and asking him if they can get him some water. And he says he'd like to do the readings later and would like time to himself. So everyone leaves, but he tells Shmuel to join him as they're all leaving. So Nicodemus has Shmuel read from the scroll from the prophet Isaiah. It's the same passage that John the Baptist has been saying all along from Isaiah 43. A voice of one calling, "In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God." So he has him read that from the Bible and or from their Torah. And Nicodemus says something like, "Do you recognize that?" He goes, "Yeah, the heretic John." So Shmuel is saying that, that John was saying it, but he tells Nicodemus that John's changing the words from a description of God in heaven to a man that's on earth. He says God cannot take human form. To say so is blasphemy. Nicodemus argues, where does it say that God cannot take form? Shmuel says Deuteronomy. Shmuel says Deuteronomy because they saw no face, and in Exodus you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. So he talks about like that this man, if he was God, he'd have to wear like a veil over his face, because otherwise everybody that looked at him would just immediately die. And Nicodemus asks him if he would place limits on God and what God can do. Shmuel mentions how when he used to listen to Nicodemus preach, his teachings were very solid. But now Shmuel says that it frightens him that he could no longer predict what Nicodemus is going to do, like or what his rulings will be. Nicodemus says how fear is what ensures that we remain ignorant. He says something about being asleep in the safety of rigid tradition. And you definitely do see that with Shmuel. He's very rigid, everything he's taught. And even then, he tells Nicodemus, I learned it from you. And Nicodemus gives the example of the Sadducees. He says that they only accept the very first books of the Bible, the law of Moses, and nothing after that. Where the Pharisees accept additional books beyond that make up their Torah, they missed out on everything after that, Nicodemus says, after those 5 books. I think they mentioned, I don't know if it was Psalms. There was a couple parts, the stories of Boaz and Ruth and stuff like that, that was not included that they would have missed out on. So Nicodemus says, I don't want to live in some bleak past where God cannot do anything new. I think he's trying to say that because the Sadducees only accepted certain books and now the Pharisees accept additional books, look at what they're missing. Well, maybe he's trying to make that parallel that the Pharisees could be missing something too. So Shmuel's concerned that that's all that Nicodemus is worried about, because Nicodemus says, I don't want to live in some bleak past where God can't do new things. Shmuel says that God gave us his law. We must uphold it. Nicodemus says that they can do both, keep their eye on the law, but still keep their eyes open to the startling and unexpected. As Nicodemus is saying, you and I could lead the others in this. You don't really get to hear a response because they get interrupted by Joseph, another Pharisee. He's saying that there's a crowd gathering to see a man preaching, and it's a common person. It's not a Pharisee or somebody from the church. Nicodemus and Shmuel say they're going to go investigate.
The scene with Nicodemus and Shmuel, I just wanted to add that I felt like Nicodemus was making a lot of good points when he was speaking with him. I really liked this scene too, because when Nicodemus made a comment about, um, how could you not think that he's human form?
Well, I know that when I was watching the round table, they alluded to Shmuel is very by the book. He's very, rigid in tradition. That it was typical of them to be very rigid in their belief. So I feel like they both had really good arguments, because even they were saying that they thought that Shmuel had good arguments. as to
Yes.
why he thought, these passages meant certain things. I think that Nicodemus was trying to say it's all in our interpretation too, because we could be interpreting it wrong.
Right.
So the next scene is the apostles, Mary and Jesus at Zebedee's house. They're discussing Jesus's lineage. I think Zebedee asks a couple questions about where he's from and his heritage. Zebedee's neighbor stops by and asks Jesus about the parable of the net. So they heard about him talking about the parable of the net when he was on the Simon's boat that day. She asked how soon the angels would come to separate the evil from the righteous. So if you remember, there was a quick little parable where he talked about fishermen collect fish. Well, at the end of days, something like that's going to happen where all the people will be gathered together and that the angels will sort out the good and evil. So this person was saying, how soon? So then he tells another parable of servants waiting at a gate to await their master's return. This is actually in the Bible from Luke 12:35 through 37. It's called watchfulness. It says, be dressed, ready for service, and keep your lamps burning, like servants waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will dress himself to serve, will have them recline at the table, and will come and wait on them. It says, it will be good for those servants whose master finds them ready, even if he comes in the middle of the night or toward daybreak. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would have not left his house. He would have not let his house be broken into. You must also be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. So he's kind of talking about that whole parable. Jesus asked the question of why would the servants wait with their lamps? And Mary answers that they're waiting because they don't know when their master will return. Jesus asks, what if the master's delayed? Why wouldn't they sleep in the master's bed? And then it was kind of funny because Barnaby and Shula show up at the window, and Barnaby answers and says, they'd get fired. They'd get kicked out. They'd get fired. And Jesus laughs. And then Barnaby says he heard what Jesus did at the wedding and asked Jesus if he could do that to his well outside of his house. Turn the water into wine.
I thought that was funny too. I loved that part.
Yeah. So Jesus continues about the servants. He says, what will be at the end of all things? Neither the angels in heaven nor the Son of Man know the day or hour, but only the Father. So Jesus doesn't even know the day of the end of days, where they're going to get separated, and some will go to heaven, some will go to hell. You must always be ready with lamps trimmed. So like if you notice when you keep a wick really tall on a candle, the flame gets really big, but sometimes I feel like it could burn quicker, but it also could put itself out sometimes if the flame is getting all flickery and weird. And so they say to trim the lamps and then keep them burning brightly. So it's supposed to be an analogy to being ready. And I think that's also supposed to mean for us, like not to let our faith waver, because sometimes maybe even in that wavering moment, what if Jesus came? Then we were technically not a believer if we weren't, you know what I mean? If we didn't keep our faith strong. I don't know. It's kind of how I take that, but I think others could probably take it differently.
Well, and I'm glad that you explained the whole analogy behind trimming the lanterns or the lamps, because when I watched it, I thought, what does that mean? But I've noticed that obviously since this is way back in the day, they have different ways of explaining things than we do today.
Yeah, because their way of life was different. Like, we don't
Right.
necessarily keep lamps around. Our lamps have LEDs or incandescent bulbs.
Right.
But I do know when I've had my candles burning, every now and then I'll burn candles in the living room. And if the wicks get too big, then my wax, burns up pretty quick, and it'll start to burn a little bit of the glass. And then I start to see the flame. I don't know if you ever saw I always have to laugh at this part. The Christmas Carol movie, the animated one with Jim Carrey. And they have the Ghost of Christmas Present. He's a flame. And there's a part in the scene where he's like moving his head and he's like flickering. I laugh because that's what the candle will look like when the wick gets really big. It will like flicker like that. And I laughed because it's a funny
I
part.
never thought about
And
that, but
it's
yeah,
so
you're right.
ridiculous, like, why I'm using that as an analogy. But anyway, but I think what it's supposed to be what they're trying to say ultimately is that's a multifaceted analogy because our faith is like a light. When they always say shine the light, like don't hide your light and this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. The light within us from Jesus, from God, from being a believer, don't let that go out. Spread the light, share the light, keep the light burning bright. So I feel like there's multiple analogies here with this whole thing of the lamp and the lantern. And he's saying, be ready with your lantern. Like, let your light still be burning bright. Don't let it go out because you don't know when he's coming. It could be day, it could be night. We don't know when it will be. That's how I see that.
I like that. I never really thought about it like that.
Yeah.
I like
So
that.
it might be a better explanation than the way I explained it the first time, but and so this one passage I had a note from Mark 13:32. It's the same saying. The title of the chapter was called The Day and Hour Unknown. So 32 says, "But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father." It says, "Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when the time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and he puts his servants in charge, each with their own assigned task, and tells one at the door to keep watch." So he's just saying it's the same thing. So a lot of that is like straight out of the Bible. So while Jesus is talking, Simon and John are standing at the back door. Simon's worried that it's getting too crowded. And when the camera pans over to Jesus telling all this to the neighbor, you see there's a crowd gathering outside the house. So the windows don't have glass in them, the doors open. So as people are walking by, they're hearing Jesus talking, and a crowd is gathering outside the house, and they're listening. They're quiet, they're intently listening into the conversation that's going on within the house. So Jesus is still sitting in the house at the table, and all these people are collecting outside. So Simon is like looking around for an escape route. He's like, let's keep this back clear in case of anything. So John is out back talking with him as they're talking about this escape route out the back of the house just in case of anything. And Simon thinks his job is to protect. John tells him, that's not your job anymore. You're a fisher of men. And then Simon is like, but I don't know what that is. And so it's interesting because he still doesn't get it, what he's supposed to be doing. And I get it. Like it hasn't really been real clear for him.
Even though he is saying he doesn't understand what that means, he's almost acting out what it means without him really knowing it. With him being a fisherman of men, I took that as Jesus wants Simon to help him get followers, right? That will follow him.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what fishermen of men mean. And I
Yeah.
feel like Simon is doing that unbeknownst to himself. Do you think that way too or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's actions he's definitely helping as far as others. Like, I don't know if he specifically has brought anyone new to Jesus, and maybe that's why he's not getting it yet. But yeah, I'm sure there are things he's doing. He's watching out for Jesus. He's part of the following. A lot of what he's seeing, a lot of what Jesus is doing and saying is going to help grow them to do that later.
Right.
So the next scene we see is Gaius and Matthew at the booth, the tax booth. Gaius is like looking around. There's really no one on the streets. A soldier comes up and says that they have a disturbance. Gaius tells Matthew to close up the shop early and head home. When Matthew finds out that they're going to see what there's this mob, he's like, I'm going to go with you. And Gaius is like, I am not going to be protecting you. You're not going with me. But Matthew was pretty set. So the next scene you see is Jesus still sitting at Zebedee's table, and they're talking now about Luke 13:1-5. So there was a lot of stuff in this episode.
Well, and I wanted to mention too, when it switches between episodes, every time it goes back to Jesus sitting at Zebedee's table, did you notice that the crowd is getting bigger and bigger?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't make a note of that, but I'm glad you said something. Yeah, it definitely got a lot bigger because initially it was just a few people in the doorway and the window. Then you got a
Right.
whole crowd in the street. Yeah.
Yes.
So in this one, he's saying, now there were some present at that time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. Jesus answered, do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered this way? I tell you no. But unless you repent, you too will all perish. Or the 18 who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them. Do you think they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? I tell you no, but unless you repent, you too will all perish. So there's different parables and different stories that Jesus would tell that these are all in this. And I did in the round table, I caught on that Dallas was saying that they didn't want to have to put the focus on all these parables, but they wanted Jesus to be telling stories when this crowd was forming. And so they decided to pick key, really good scriptures that they would just do little pieces of. And then in the hopes that people would go look them up in their Bibles, which is what I did. So yeah, I thought that was interesting too, that they purposely wanted different stories and just little blips of the story. So you don't hear the whole story, but that's why all these people are showing up because they're interesting stories that he would tell. So then Shula and Barnaby are still in the window. Shula asks about prayer and that she doesn't like praying in public. And Jesus answers her with the part from the Bible from Matthew 6, verses 5 through 6. He says, "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you do pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." If you ever read the Bible, anything in red is Jesus's words. Anything in black is like other words from the writer of that book. So these are all quotes from him, and he teaches them the "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name." That's the next part. That's verses from Matthew 6, verses 9 through 14 is the Lord's Prayer. That was another one where Dallas thought it would be good to interject part of it. He didn't put the whole thing in there, having Shula ask the question, even though Shula's not in the Bible. But Jesus' response, this is just some of that back and forth discussion. And in the round table, they talked about would a rabbi at that time, would there be back and forth discussion and conversation in the teachings? And it might not have been during their services, but they think that there was definitely a lot of that back and forth, not only with their like rabbi teachers, but with even the Pharisees, that, it wouldn't have just been one sided. So this would be how they would teach back then. So next you see the woman from Egypt, and she's with a group of friends, and they're carrying a man on a stretcher. The woman is trying to get closer to Jesus, but the crowd is just too big. The disciples are trying to stop her, and she tells them that she wants Jesus to help her friend. She tells Simon that she saw what Jesus did to the leper, and they tell her that they're trying to keep that under wraps, because he didn't want people to tell about it. So while they're talking, a couple of Roman soldiers now show up, and you can tell Simon looks like he wants to start a fight. And he says he's going to take care of it, but Andrew says, "I'll go talk to them." And so he gets Simon to calm down. You also see Matthew on the perimeter of the crowd. He's trying to work his way closer, but as he's walking, people are spitting at him and they're pushing him, and it's like, oh boy, here we go again. But eventually, somebody's throwing something at him, which you think is rocks at first. And we look up and it's Abigail and Joshua. And I was like, oh, they are in the episodes again. So those two kids from episode 3, Jesus Loves the Little Children, Abigail and Joshua, they're sitting on the rooftop eating grapes, and they were tossing grapes down at him, and they told him, "Come up here." And he's like, "How'd you get up there?" And there's a ladder right there. And so he had to climb the ladder, and you see him take his little tissue that he walks around with, and he's trying to wipe everything off of the ladder as he's going up the ladder. And he's kind of going really slow, and he looks like he's having a hard time. And then eventually Simon comes up behind him and kind of pushes him up the ladder to help him get up there. Then Matthew is up there, and then Simon gets up there too.
I wanted to add that, that scene, I really felt bad for Matthew, the way he was being treated by the crowd. And then when he did run into the children that were in episode 3, he was almost going to start getting short with them. Like, hey, I'm just here to listen, until he looked up and realized it was children. So I thought that was kind of cool because the children were very inviting, which was a far cry from what he experienced as he was walking through the crowd.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's interesting. I was trying to remember what they talked about in the round table, but they were saying that you remember when Jesus was teaching the children at the camp, he was saying he hopes his next group of students are going to have the faith and the yearning and everything that these kids have for the word. and their understanding of it. And then you have Matthew, who has no faith. And now he's sitting with the kids. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
I like that.
Jesus wants us to have faith like a child. And so now you've got these two kids that have this great faith sitting next to Matthew, who needs that childlike faith.
Yeah, I thought that was perfect, that it just so ended up that he would be sitting next to those children. I thought was a great start to start building Matthew's faith.
Yeah, I do feel like that every time there's stuff with Matthew, like my empathy is like it just like it breaks my heart, like the idea of how he was hated so much. And I bet you it was probably even worse than that in those times. Being a tax collector who was a Jew who was working for the Romans, I could only imagine.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
He definitely really wasn't accepted by anybody except for maybe this Gaius, which I don't know that we even know that a Gaius existed in the Bible, that if he even had a friend like that.
Yeah.
So then you see in the crowd the lady from Egypt, Tamar. Mary offers to try to help her. They try to get closer down on the street, but they just can't. It's just too crowded. Mary says that she doesn't want to cause a scene. The man who's on the little stretcher, he says, "What if you were me?" And Mary says, "I was you once." So that kind of was a little bit of a tearjerker, just knowing that she's saying, "I was like this once, but he helped me," kind of thing. So the woman then says, "What about the roof?" And then it pans away from them. So next you're seeing Shmuel, Joseph, and Nicodemus. They show up in the crowd. People are so into what Jesus is saying that they're kind of being rude. They're not really looking. And as Shmuel and them are trying to get through, people are like, "Stop it. What are you doing?" And you could tell Shmuel's getting really offended. And Nicodemus puts him in his place. He's like, we're out of our element here. Not that they're not supposed to be there, but they're out of their element. Shmuel sees Mary on the roof and that she's restored. And he calls that to attention to the group he's with, Joseph and Nicodemus. And Nicodemus says, "Why is she here?" And all like, "Why is she here?" You could tell he's thinking and maybe putting two and two together, like, "Oh, is the person that healed her here?" Because he's been trying to find this out, right? So meanwhile, Jesus is talking about a light under a bushel from Matthew 5:15. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand and give light to everyone in the house. So in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So that's just another little tidbit that Dallas wanted to throw in there from the Bible. So Mary helps them get to the roof. The woman from Egypt yells down to Jesus from that opening in the roof. And she tells Jesus that she saw what he did for the leper. She says that her friend has been paralyzed since birth. They start breaking apart the roof and opening it wider, and they lower their friend and they ask Jesus to help him. The disciples start moving tables out of the way and help lower him down all the way into the house where Jesus is. Matthew and Abigail and Joshua are all in awe as they're watching from across the street. And I think this is the part where Joshua has the grapes sitting on his lap, and Matthew's just pulling grapes out of it and eating it almost like it's popcorn at the movie theater, is what it kind of reminded me of. That he's not looking away. He's looking at Jesus and what's happening in the house, and his hand is just eating the grapes, which was hilarious to me. It reminded me of like when we're at a movie and it's so good, but we're also still eating the popcorn. It
Yeah.
kind of reminded me of
And
that.
I noticed that too, which was a big change from the beginning because when they offered him grapes, he refused.
Yeah, and he was kinda wiping stuff off
Yeah.
too. 'Cause I even felt like that I forgot to mention it too, like, in Gaius's office, when Gaius is in this great mood, he offers Matthew an olive, and when Matthew takes the olive, if you notice in that scene, he takes it with the cloth. Like, he doesn't even touch it with his hands, he's taking it with that cloth.
And I did notice that. I'll have to go back and watch that
Yeah.
part.
And then what's funny is now you see him wiping off the ladder with the cloth, and I'm like, "Okay, well, this isn't all making exact sense, but okay, whatever."
All right. It's almost like as time goes on and he's starting to believe a little bit, he's getting more relaxed.
Yeah, he's letting his guard down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Matthew, Abigail, and Joshua are watching in awe from across the street. So they're on the roof across the street. The caption says that people are yelling, "Heal him, Jesus." So they use the pulley system to lower him down. Once the man is on the floor, Shmuel shows up at the window. and asks Jesus, by whose authority does he teach? So while he's yelling that to Jesus, Jesus isn't answering him. Tamar is yelling down to him from the roof, or talking to him from the roof, if you are willing, Rabbi. Shmuel is still insisting that Jesus answers his question of, by whom does he teach? Because he was saying, surely not from, a rabbi in Nazareth, or he was throwing out different things. And Jesus didn't respond. Jesus keeps eye contact with Tamar the whole time, and he says to her, your faith is beautiful. So Jesus talks to the man and says that his sins are forgiven. Jesus pretty much says the verses from Mark 2, 1 through 12. It says, a few days later, when Jesus entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door. And he preached the word to them. Some men came bringing to him a paralyzed man carried by four of them. So the woman wasn't mentioned, and I think they added that for the series. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it. And then, lowering the mat the man was laying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, son, your sins are forgiven. Now some teachers of the law were sitting there, thinking to themselves, why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Now notice it says, sitting there thinking to themselves. Immediately Jesus knew in spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts, and he said to them, why are you thinking these things? Which is easier to say to this paralyzed man, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up, take your mat, and walk? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So he said to the man, I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home. So Jesus is saying this, in the series, they're making like Shmuel's asking questions, and Shmuel does say something about blasphemy, I believe. So in the scene, Jesus crouches down eye level to him, and he tells him that whole thing is recited in this scene. I say to you, my son, rise, pick up your bed, and go home. So then you see this person. His toes wiggle, and then people in the room are helping him get up, and he tries taking a step, and he's crying, and he hugs Jesus. People are clapping. Matthew looks amazed. The man walks out, and you see Nicodemus. His face is in shock as the man is stepping out of the house. Jesus smiles up to Tamar, and the next thing you know, Shmuel's yelling to the Roman guards that there's a threat to public peace. The crowd disbands, and Simon immediately tries to get Jesus out of there and out that back route that he had been planning. So while all this chaos is breaking out, you see the man is slowly walking from the house. And so all you see is this mad rush around them. Nicodemus is standing there, his jaws wide open. He's just staring in disbelief. And the man is slowly walking from the house, and he's not looking down at his feet. He's looking straight ahead, and he's got I can't even describe the look on his face, but as he's walking toward Nicodemus, he gently smiles at him, and Nicodemus's face turns from this awe to a smile as well, but also like wonder. And so it's just like, it's a really impactful scene. It's like, I was bawling when I was watching it.
I was too, and I wanted to mention, I thought it was so cool how the producer, when you could tell in the background, it's kind of chaotic. Everybody's trying to leave.
Oh, yeah.
They're ordering the guards to obviously confront or, I don't know, attack Jesus or what they were going to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they were going to do.
But it was almost like Nicodemus and this paralytic man that can all of a sudden walk now was in slow motion.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if anybody caught on to it. I did. You could almost hear like a heartbeat in the background. There wasn't like music playing, but it was like slow motion, and it was like the noise of a heartbeat as Nicodemus is just staring at him in awe. I loved the scene.
Yeah, I didn't even catch the heartbeat part. Maybe it was subconscious for me. I'll have to watch it again. But the whole thing of the man's face, him crying, the look on Nicodemus's face. I mean, the actors really, I was crying like a baby, tears running down my face.
So was I, because when he healed him, again, it was just like another miracle. Like, wow, this guy has been paralyzed since he was born.
Yeah.
Or since he was little, or whatever the backstory was. And lived most of his life as a paralytic man.
Yeah, not even be able to imagine what that's been like, and now he's been healed, and to know that Jesus really did that for people, and then to see Nicodemus, who's already been in such awe at Mary's healing and just different things he's been hearing, and then he gets to see it for himself, and now the look on his face, it's almost like I kind of feel like it's silly, but it's not exactly. Like the Grinch, now his heart has grown 3 to size.
Right, right. Well,
I feel like that's the look on his face.
yeah. Well, and I wanted to mention too that, it's shocking because there have been several occasions where Jesus has done more of a private miracle with just a few people that have seen it. And he asks that people not spread the word of what he's doing. But yet
Mhm.
he does this in front of hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like it was meant to, like, give him a pat on the back. I felt like it was so genuine that
Yeah.
he didn't care who was watching. He wanted to help this man.
Well, and they did talk about that. So that was one of the things I wanted to wait till this miracle to say it. But they were talking about a couple things. There was two of them. One of if you are willing, like every time you hear these people say, if you are willing, Dallas asks why they say that and what does it mean? They said that they thought that it's its own statement of faith and it's a recognition that not everyone seeking healing is going to get healed. Dallas says that he doesn't heal everyone, and many times it's a tool to bring us closer to Christ, like through our suffering, and which I have heard that too. I did an episode on affliction and how sometimes affliction, even though it's not fun, it's not pretty, and it's not like God enjoys it, but sometimes it will strengthen our faith. Now it could do the opposite and make people bitter too, but it can strengthen your faith, and then when you are healed, you're so much more appreciative, and now you have compassion for those who had something similar and maybe can share your story. So there's many things to it that the suffering, I think there's positives that come out of it. But they said that it's them saying if you are willing is because they recognize that not everyone's going to be willing. So the evangelical theologian said that it's ultimately God's choice who gets healed, which is true. And then the Catholic priest says that Jesus didn't want to do signs to do tricks. There's something to be learned through the suffering, just like we talked about that, and that it could be redemptive. And so the other thing that they talked about was the not yet, not yet. Like, don't share my name, don't spread it. It's not my time yet, not yet. The evangelical theologian said that it's referred to as the messianic secret. He wanted to keep his identity secret. He was the Messiah. So it could be misunderstood. So like if the word was going out, people would misunderstand it. So like for instance, I guess on the example which we're going to see later, Jesus feeds this big group of people because he was able to feed them. And I won't go into the details. I don't want to ruin the whole thing. But people in the Bible, when that happened, I guess, and I never caught that. I still have to read it to see. But I guess they said they wanted to make him king. And the idea is, oh, he fed all of us. We'll make him king and he'll feed us all like this all the time. And Jesus didn't want to do those things for those reasons. They said that he was picking specific times, well, to help the proclamation of the kingdom. So if the healing was going to serve to help the proclamation of the kingdom, he would do it. But if he thought it would hurt or hinder the proclamation of the kingdom, he wouldn't do it. So some regions might have had more healings and things going on than others. He couldn't heal everybody. They were kind of joking like it's not like at that time nobody had leprosy and he had cured all the diseases. Even though he could have, he didn't. He picked and chose when he was going to do it. So it's kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah. It said too that there was also expectations of the Messiah. People had different expectations as what he would be like or who he would be. You know, they talked about him being potentially a person who was going to lead a military, and so he's nothing like that. And then they were also saying that Jesus always, when he says this stuff and he's healing, he'll tell people your sins are forgiven. And then the miracle is then tied to the relationship to God. So Dallas asked, when Jesus is saying your sins are forgiven, was it just a setup or like a thing for those who are observing, like a way of getting them to hear it? And the Catholic priest said that Jesus can look into people's hearts and know what they need, that whatever they needed to hear, that they were forgiven. Like if that was what they needed most, he would tell them, you are forgiven. And that the healing was more for the Pharisees observing. So the paralytic walking away, he was walking away with joy beyond words. And that was supposed to be for the observers too. But they think that him saying your sins are forgiven are really what that person needed to hear the most. So I thought that was interesting too. I was surprised with this part where Shmuel, and I think you brought it up, or maybe it was Jennifer. I was asking our other sister because she watched the episode. And it is shocking how Shmuel will yell to the Roman guards that there's a threat. It seemed like everything was fine. It was a peaceful gathering. And now you got these Roman soldiers running through there with swords and everybody running around like crazy. I guess everybody's just lucky nobody got hurt, you know?
Right.
So next you see Gaius pounding on the door to Zebedee's house. So he finally gets up to the door. And when Zebedee and the wife open the door, they're the only two in the house. The guards see that the back door is cracked open, but they don't bother following. Then they pan away from there. Now you see Mary. She's walking down the back steps to come off of the roof, and Nicodemus stops her. So he must have walked around the back of the house, and he tells her that he saw a miracle. He's like, I saw a paralytic walk past me on his own 2 feet. And Mary says, you've asked me if I knew his name, but now I'm afraid everybody knows his name. And she fears for his safety. Nicodemus tells her that he means no harm, but he wants to be able to talk to Jesus. And Mary says, I don't know. We're just following him. He doesn't follow us, and he doesn't tell us his plans. And so he earnestly says, please get a meeting. It could be anytime, any place. I'll meet you. I'll even meet him in a tomb. And she looks at him funny too when he says that. And she says, I'll see what I can do. So then you see they part, and then you see Matthew, and he's on the ground by that ladder, and he looks lost. And Abigail says down to him from the roof, she says, are you lost? And he said, yes, I am. So then you see him slowly walking around in the back streets, like kind of where Nicodemus was, but somewhere else. And he stops when he sees Jesus and the apostles ducking through a gateway. And it's like Jesus senses that now Matthew's there watching. And he stops, turns, and smiles at Matthew, and then ducks through the gateway and leaves. And the episode ends.
I, again, absolutely loved that part because there were no words exchanged, but yet you could almost kind of tell what could have been said. Like maybe Jesus knew that, again, kind of like Simon, that Matthew's faith, he doesn't know what to believe. He doesn't know if he's being deceived, but he knows something miraculous is happening. And I think Jesus might know that he's kind of like believing in him now. And by him, this smile said 1,000 words without talking. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Do you agree?
Yeah, yeah. I felt
Yeah.
like there was definitely a connection of some kind. It's like funny. I felt like Matthew looked like a lost little puppy standing there in the alleyway. And then when Jesus stopped, you could almost see Matthew. I want to say he gasped, but maybe he even held his breath. And then Jesus was turning to look. I mean, that's how I interpreted it. I don't know if that's really what he did or not. But it was one of those moments where we're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen?
Right. Yeah. Oh, I agree. I agree.
So there was some kind of moment, and he smiles at him, and his expression does change, but they still don't ever talk. A Catholic priest in the round table mentioned this. I thought it was a good note. He loves the setup of Nicodemus and Matthew. Both are involved in heavily rigid systems. Matthew with the tax collection and the Roman occupation, and Nicodemus with organized religion. And then you see their journeys of how they're handling everything that's going on. So there was something interesting too about that one of the Gospels of Mark, I read that one, talked about them removing the roof and digging through it. Well, in Luke, it says they removed tiles. And so they asked Dallas if he did that on purpose. They did both in the scene. Not only were they digging, because there was like straw up there and stuff, but they were also pulling off pieces of the roof. And Dallas said that it just turned out that they didn't have enough time to really pull off all the pieces to do the filming. They wanted to be a pretty quick thing that the sky would be lowered down into the room so that there wasn't a whole lot of time of waiting, that they just decided to do that as a way to expedite getting the scene to move along a little quicker to get the guy into the room. It was more of a logistics thing, but they thought that was perfect because then they didn't pick one gospel over the other of how they were going to interpret it. They kind of did both.
But there was something that I was curious about. So backing way up into the scene before they met the guy that had leprosy, and Jesus was talking to the apostles as they were walking. One of the apostles, and I don't remember if it was John, James, or another one, was talking to Jesus about him coming from Egypt, and because he spoke the language of that woman, mentioned some kind of war that they had where they killed children under the age of 2, and I felt like that was kind of an important part because Jesus was 2. He made it very clear to the apostles that he was 2 years old when that happened.
Yeah.
And I wondered, how did he get out of there without being one of those children that got killed? So then, like, my mind is spiraling. Like, okay, did his mom get him out of there before they had the chance to see Jesus and kill him? Or because Jesus has a bigger, better thing that he's doing, he was able to, like, spiritually escape it? I
Yeah.
don't know. I was really curious about that.
James talked about the massacre of the innocents and all the 2-year-old boys, but I'm glad you asked about him escaping it because I didn't touch on that. And it is in the Bible about that.
And then I was curious about that, if that was something that was ever talked about in the Bible.
Yeah. I believe the story, and I'm going to try to find the part where they talk about it, is that God or an angel or somebody had told Mary and Joseph or one or the other ahead of time that hey, you need to go because of this. And mainly this decree went out because at the time the king that was in charge was very paranoid. And I found out through the round table actually that his own 2 sons were killed by him, and I don't know how exactly they were killed, but they were both killed. And there was a joke back in those days about it's better to be a pig in this king's household than a person or a relative because he killed the relatives, but the pigs were considered sacred, so they wouldn't kill the pigs, but he'd kill his own children. But regardless, he had heard that there was a king that was born, and he didn't know what that meant. A lot of people didn't know what it meant. And he was worried that he was going to get thrown off of his throne with this new king. And so they had been looking for this baby king. And when they couldn't find him, he eventually said, okay. So it must have taken 2 years. And then finally he said, 2 years or younger, kill them all. And then that way would guarantee that this king wouldn't live long enough to be king.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so somehow ahead of that, and I'm going to try to find it, the family, whether it was Mary or Joseph, was told, leave this area. And they left before that happened, before Jesus could be killed.
Okay. And maybe that was because back then they were fearful of what this king might accomplish. Just wanted to like eliminate what they
Yeah.
thought would be a threat.
Yeah, I'm looking ahead to try to see if I can find that part. Yeah. Okay, here it is. The escape to Egypt. Matthew 2, verse 13. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said. Take this child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you. For Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled that the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with that time he had learned from the Magi. So the Magi, I think, were the 3 wise men or something, I believe. And I don't know if he got some of this word from them, and that's how he found out that Jesus was this king that was born. I think
Wow.
that is what they're insinuating. And then it said, then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. So Herod had all these boys killed. I don't know if he thought that they were searching for Jesus, and because they never found him, he thought that they told him just a story, and he was so pissed, is almost what it sounds like, that he had all the 2-year-olds killed. I mean, that's kind of how that reads. I don't know how you think, what you think of
Yeah.
that.
It's a sad story.
It
You
is.
know,
It
to
is.
think that something like that over one person that they thought was a king and can possibly be a threat to do something like that.
But the same thing happened with baby Moses. So there was a point when there was a king of Egypt. They didn't want the babies to thrive. They actually told these women that were helping the Hebrew women during childbirth that if you see the baby's a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, let her live. But a lot of the midwives, they couldn't do that. They feared God and they didn't do what the king told them to do. And they let the boys live. And then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said, why have you done this? Why have you let these boys live? And they answered that the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, and they are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive as a way to try to get out of it. So God was kind to them and increased their numbers, and they became more numerous, these midwives as well, because they were God fearing and they weren't going to abide by what this king was saying. Well, when Pharaoh gave these orders, he said, every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw them into the Nile, but let every girl live. So then when baby Moses was born, the woman was afraid that her son was going to get killed, so she put him in a basket and hid him among the reeds. And then when Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, they found the baby. And then she just thought he was absolutely adorable. And so she took him into her household. But because the mother and daughter were still nearby the basket, they made it like, oh, we can help you nurse him and we can help you. So it turned out that not only did baby Moses get saved, but that his mother got to nurse him and still be with him, even though technically Pharaoh's daughter adopted him. It's just a very interesting story. So for whatever reason, these people would want to like mass kill these babies and children because they, I guess, felt it was a threat to them being king.
Right. I don't know if you've ever watched the Ten Commandments movie,
Oh,
but
yeah.
that scene is in the Ten Commandments
Yeah.
where the Pharaoh's daughter finds this baby on the river and
Yeah.
takes it in. And I always wondered when I watched that movie, like, wow, how did this baby end up in this basket on the river? So it's
Yeah.
interesting to learn the backstory on it.
Yeah, and then there's a lot that goes into that, but there was a whole, I mean, Moses needed to stay alive. It was destined because he was supposed to help everybody get out of Egypt. God did a lot through Moses, and so it was meant that he was supposed to be saved. But
Yeah,
yeah, definitely got on a tangent with that. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to say about the whole episode for the ending?
I do. I am curious to see what happens with all of the miracles that Jesus has performed, if there is going to be a part where he decides to heal Eden's mother,
Oh,
because Eden's mother has been suffering. And I find it very interesting that Simon has not asked Jesus to heal her. I almost feel like Simon doesn't want to be a burden. He thinks Jesus is amazing, and doesn't want
yeah.
to ask him of anything else. But I'm wondering if that's going to come in an episode where Jesus heals Eden's mom.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we know that Shula and Barnaby also know Jesus or see him in these episodes. And the round table they asked, or they kind of just in general said, I wonder if Shula is going to ask, heal my blindness, or if James is going to ask, because he's got a limp, if, to be healed. There's a lot of people around right now that we see that have different afflictions or things going on.
Yeah.
I guess I just feel like if anybody's watching our podcast and they have not watched the episodes, would you say this? I feel like so far out of all of them, like this one was like, wow, like it's really starting to get good. I think episode 4 was good too, but this one had a lot in it that was just like, okay, now do you feel hooked if you didn't feel hooked before?
Oh, I was just going to say that. Absolutely. I felt like this was the episode that was like, yeah, I'm watching the rest of the series.
Yeah, and maybe I shouldn't say this. Our other sister, I'm glad she's watching it. And these first few episodes, like she enjoyed episode 3 of Jesus Loves Little Children. She knows that was your favorite one so far. And she knows mine is coming up. She's like, I'm going to at least watch those. I'm going to give it a chance. And she always tells me she feels like her emotions, like she has no emotions. And she's like, I cried. I cried for parts of these scenes. And I'm like, there you go. See, you do have emotions.
Yes.
So
Yes.
she's enjoying it too. And so I'm like, well, if she's enjoying it, and I'm not saying if she's enjoying it, anybody can enjoy it. You know what I mean? But I'm just
Right.
saying,
Right.
but I'm like, I'm happy to hear that she's enjoying it as much as we are. And
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Now, Jessica, the next episode is your favorite, correct?
yes.
Episode 7?
Yeah, episode 7 is one of my favorites, and I'll tell everybody why next time. But it is called Invitations, and I'm sure there's more than just. I'm only thinking of one scene, but I'm sure just like this episode, I forgot about a lot of these other scenes. There's probably multiple, we'll say, invitations that happen in there that I'll probably have forgotten about. But my favorite one is in there, and that's, yeah, I'm looking forward to that one too. So
Yeah, me too.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
everybody, for listening. If you haven't watched the episodes, I don't know that I would jump to episode 6 right away, but I'd say give it a chance. If you're not liking this series and you're watching it, the first couple episodes are kind of slow. It's just to give a backstory on the characters. Episodes 4, 5, 6, and by the time you get to the end of this season, it's like, okay, now I don't want to miss anything. That's how I've felt with the series.
Right. Yeah, and I'm always excited to watch the next one. Like, now I can't wait to watch 7.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll do a short prayer and then we'll talk to everybody later. Oh Lord, please focus our hearts and minds on your Son, Jesus, our greatest treasure. Amen.